Welcome everyone to our first Academic Hot Topics session of 2022. My name is Carrie Camel. I'm the Assistant Director for Education and Outreach here at the Center. And we're really excited to bring you these sessions this year. They're a little different than the ones we've done in the past. And we've designed these sessions in order to have some more in-depth conversations with our academic partners and fellows that are either on MSU's campus or ones that we work with in other universities. As usual, these sessions are open to anyone in the brand protection field that's interested in these topics. We are recording the session for those of you who couldn't make it and are watching this at a later date. And I would encourage you who are attending live to ask questions in the question feature of Livestorm. This event is part of our larger outreach program at the A-CAPP Center, which focuses on topics that are relevant for brand protection professionals. As a reminder, for those of you who may have worked with us before or attended our outreach events or different activities, we have a wide range of them beyond our online events, and hopefully maybe later this year in 2022, an in-person event again. But we also host the Brand Protection Stories podcast, which is hosted by our own Leah Everett-Burks. We had a new episode drop last week featuring John Zachariah, as well as our Brand Protection Professional magazine, which is free and an online resource, which is published quarterly. So that next publication will be coming out later this month. We also have our Brand Protection Certificate, which many of you might be familiar with, which provides 17 courses that are online, on demand, and can be taken anytime for brand protection professionals looking to get up to speed on the basics of brand protection. We also have a fairly robust internship program every semester with students from every discipline in MSU that are able to apply both at the undergraduate, graduate, and professional levels. And we're always looking to place our students in brand protection jobs as the next generation of brand protection professionals. So if any of you are interested in hiring one of our students or recent grads, please feel free to reach out to me. A special thanks to everybody at the center who helped out with this event. Brandon, Leah, and Sarah, I know you're back there, so thank you very much. And I'd like to thank today our gold sponsor of the series, Abbott, without who we would not be able to run this series of events. And nice to see a lot of you online that I know, so great to see you all here as well. So I'm really excited today to be hosting one of my favorite academics to talk about his research and perspectives on social digital technologies in anti-counterfeiting efforts. Salim, I feel every time we talk, I learn something new. Professor Salim El-Habash researches on processes and effects of new and social media within the context of persuasion. He investigates the cognitive, emotional responses, and psychological effects associated with using new and social media. And his research is geared towards understanding how new communication technologies can be used as persuasive tools. To read his complete bio, feel free to go to the A-CAPP Center website. So we're going to start today. Salim, thanks again for being part of this. Just the first question is, what are the two biggest areas in which you've been focusing your research in the past 2 years?
Thank you, Carrie, and thanks to everyone who is attending today. I think there might be a feedback in the, maybe Carrie, if you want to mute. Is the feedback still going on? Let me try to change the setting.
Still can't hear you, Salim. Nope. You can all bear with us for a minute while we figure this out.
How about now? Okay, we're good. So wonderful. So of course, these technological things are going to happen when we're talking about technology. This seems to be the modus operandi. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're on a different time zone. I'm thrilled to work with the A-CAPP and also to work collaboratively with Carrie and the other is at the A-CAPP Center. It is a center that is near and dear to my heart, and we've established a strong collaborative relationship over the past few years of my involvement with the A-CAPP Center. So going back to your question, Carrie, in regards to my research. So as you mentioned in the introduction, my research focuses on this concept of digital persuasion, or the process by which someone's attitudes and or behaviors change as a function of using information communication technology. So in this line of research, I examine direct persuasion attempts like digital advertising and marketing, as well as indirect persuasion incidents as they relate to communication among social and digital media users. So more specifically, I've been studying how digital and social media affect individuals' perceptions, attitudes, as well as behaviors as they relate to risky behaviors. But before that, to be able to understand the persuasive effects of digital and social media, my research starts by looking at the basic level of understanding how social media users, primarily and particularly Generation Z, integrate social and digital media in their lives. My collaborators and I have examined motivations for using social media and found that despite the original premise of social media as this hub for social relationship management and maintaining offline relationships in an online setting, over the years, we're seeing that the patterns of their usage has become more passive. So we're seeing motivations like entertainment, convenience, as well as habitual use of social media to be the primary drivers of why people use social media. Another intriguing finding from the research that we've done deals with how much value do social media users place on their own digital presence. So as we know, all of these digital platforms offer memberships and accounts for free. But in a series of studies where I collaborated with economists to try and quantify the value of social media platforms to users, we found out, so we brought people into the lab or conducted these studies online, and we basically asked people, how much money are you willing to get paid to stop using a social media platform like Facebook or Instagram? And our findings collectively from these studies showed that the average amount for the willingness to get paid to stop using these platforms was far greater than the dollar value that the user has as a function of the market cap for Facebook or Meta. So this finding is important because it tells us that social media are inherently integrated into people's lives, and it is important on so many levels. So the question then becomes is how do these insights explain the potential for enacting risky behaviors within and because of social media? So in this regard, we conducted a number of studies over the past few years related to the relationship between social media use and alcohol use, especially alcohol use and excessive use among college students, because it tends to be a big problem, as well as other risky substances. So in this regard,
can I pause you there, Salim?
yes.
Can you explain to the audience how you define risky behaviors online?
Well, risky behaviors online involve different classes of individuals being exposed to content they're not supposed to be exposed to. So let's say we're talking about an underage social media user. Risky behavior or risky content could be exposure to pictures of people drinking. It could also be in the sense of someone posting about drinking or getting intoxicated. So, for example, in one of the studies that we've conducted, we content analyzed 47.5 million tweets, and we found out that 2 out of every 100 tweets were related to alcohol use out of the entire Twitter universe. And the majority of these were related to intoxication. So there's that emphasis or trend of amplifying these types of risky behaviors in terms of binge drinking or excessive drinking or planning to get drunk and whatnot. And what we're finding in these studies is there are these affordances of social media in terms of having access to content, so being exposed to content, as well as interacting with content, so liking, sharing, commenting, and generating content that is related to alcohol use. All of them mirror and contribute to people's likelihood to engage in drinking and sometimes excessive drinking. So it is important to say that Another important finding within this regard deals with the strong and powerful influence of social norms on social media. So, whenever someone is posting about alcohol, for example, the other people who are seeing this message might perceive that the prevalence and or acceptance of that behavior is something that they should follow through, and it ultimately affects how they perceive the behaviors that they are enacting. So all of these findings, what they are pointing to is that whenever we think about social media platforms, we have to consider them as social organisms, meaning that they evolve, they grow, they mutate, they go through the process of any other biological organism. And that means that there is a challenge with how do we control what happens on social media. Because even the system designers, given that these are machine learning algorithms, do not quite know how to navigate these systems. So it's so important when we think about risky behaviors like engaging in selling or buying counterfeit products, that these types of platforms have become extensions of people's thinking, extensions of our minds, extensions of our lives, and they have become part and parcel of how we conduct our lives online as well as offline.
So we have one question right now that I'm going to jump to. Since social media now is a big risk area for brands, how do brands go about effective messaging in this space?
That's a great question. I think, and one of the areas that I think is critical. So I've been studying social media for the past decade and a half since they have emerged in their current form, and I've seen the way that social media has been integrated into marketing, advertising, and promotion, and within the larger context of persuasion. So we look at the beginning era of social media. There was a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, a lot of let's throw everything on the wall and see what sticks to develop effectiveness of strategies. Now we're moving into a more integrative and systematic way of dealing with social media. And what it starts with is a deep understanding of social media users. We tend to stereotype or perceive that everyone on social media likes the same things because everyone loves cat videos. But whenever we're trying to influence behavior and attitude change, without truly understanding who are the social media users, why are they using social media, every persuasion attempt is an interruption for the media experience of the users. And in order to be valuable and effective, it has to be conducted in a way that is relevant to the target audience, and also with a deep understanding of what are the underlying mechanisms and perceptions as they pertain to, let's say, brand protection. So the age of a one size fits all is far gone. We are in the era of message tailoring, of strategy tailoring, and leveraging different sources of information, whether it's from big data and analytics and all the fancy algorithmic digital data that we can get through the business side of social media. But we also need to go and talk to people themselves, to consumers, and try to understand and decipher that relationship, that complex relationship that they have with these platforms, and see how we fit as brand protection specialists into that particular space. It also, another important facet is people are overloaded on social media with information. So we have to consider what is the motivation that someone is going to stop and pay attention to a message that tells them about the risks of buying a counterfeit product. And so with that in mind, we have to produce strategies that have a good understanding of who the consumers are, but leverage appeals that have been shown to be effective in previous academic and non-academic research to really get the message across in a way that does not create what is called psychological reactance. And that concept is and I'm sure a lot of the brand protection specialists have experienced this. When you go and tell someone not to do something, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is, I'm going to do it. That's the same way as telling smokers not to smoke. So, for example, heavy smokers, when they are presented with messages that discuss the dangers of smoking, they immediately start craving cigarettes because that creates that reactance and it threatens their freedom. And oftentimes, whenever we're talking about sensitive topics, where we are pointing the finger at the individual and trying to elevate their sense of individual responsibility, there's a fine line there between getting them agitated and feeling that their freedom is threatened and getting the necessary buy-in to the message that we are trying to promote and raise awareness to.
So I have another question that builds off of that, and I think your risky behavior research too. How can you determine the risk in social media posts when the posts aren't the actual behaviors of those individuals necessarily?
Well, so in a lot of my research, what we try to do is we try to establish causal chains between the online and offline worlds. And over the years, doing multiple studies, we have found that engagement online is a strong positive predictor in what people do offline. They try to harmonize what they're doing online to what they're doing offline. So we've examined that in the context of drinking, for example, as it relates to, exposure to a particular message that is promoting drinking or a particular alcoholic brand, and just noticing that the likelihood of buying that brand or engaging in drinking intensifies after people express intentions to engage with the message online by liking, sharing, and commenting. But also, the other part of my research also shows that just the sheer exposure to these risky behaviors, to these risky substances on social media, is bound to have an immediate effect on behavior. So, for example, in one of the studies that we conducted, we invited people into the lab and we grouped them into two groups. We randomly assigned them to two groups. And in one group, they were exposed to alcohol ads, beer ads in that case, because it's relevant to the majority of the population. And in the other group, they were exposed to water ads. And as we expected, those who were exposed to the beer ads wanted to drink more. So we're talking about intention here. But the trick is, at the end of the study, we gave them a $10 incentive, a reward for participating in the study. And we gave them an option. Either they can pick a gift card for a local coffee shop or a local bar. And those who were exposed to the beer ads, 73% of them who were exposed to the beer ads, those who were exposed to the beer ads ended up choosing the bar gift card, as opposed to those who were exposed to the water ads, who expressed it was basically a coin toss. So about 55% of them only picked the bar gift card. So just the sheer exposure to that message create that, cognitive mechanism, cognitive link that elevates the importance of drinking. And, we're seeing that in other areas of risks, right? So now, in everything that we are seeing, from politics to society to social problems, just the fact that you see something online makes you perceive it to be more important, makes you think that everyone is doing it. And just take that and apply it to, a TikTok influencer who is gloating about unboxing fake Gucci bags or fake Balenciagas or whatever that is. So that also messes with it. It primes participants to think, you know what, I might do that. But it also creates a situation where we start perceiving that this type of behavior, if this person didn't get in trouble, why would I get in trouble? So I start perceiving that everyone does it. Why shouldn't I do it? Everyone accepts it. Why shouldn't I do it? Because you don't see much, and working through that in filter bubbles that we have on social media, it is very unlikely that within these networks that we see someone saying, you are posting about counterfeit bags and that is bad for the economy and blah, 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 blah. We don't often see that. We see messages that are in support, and that further enhances that idea that it is acceptable and prevalent to engage in these risky behaviors.
How do the algorithms fit into this? So, I can talk from personal experience in our office where students have been doing research on counterfeits on e-commerce platforms and social media and things like that, and they every single one of them note they start popping up in their feed counterfeit ads once they start the research. So, how does that impact all of this?
I think that's the $1 million question or the $1 billion question, because I don't think the algorithm knows how the algorithm works. But I mean, the whole idea of the algorithm, as far as we know, is that it presents information to your newsfeed based on lookalike audiences. So people within your demographic area, geographic area, it will increase the salience of certain types of content. But also, it is very sensitive to the type of content that you see and watch. So let's say, for example, you're scrolling through TikTok and you stopped and watched multiple times a video that features a counterfeit product. That tips off the algorithm that this is the type of content that is going to get stickiness, because the whole premise of these algorithms is to keep you engaged for the longest time possible, because time equals money. Eyeballs on the screen equals money for these systems. So then it tips it off and you start seeing more of that same content. And we're seeing the impact of that in other areas of life. In politics, once you start seeing something or interacting with something that resembles your political opinion, you'll start seeing more of this and more of this and more of that. And it creates this iterative cycle of, I'm seeing more of this content. It must be acceptable. It must be prevalent. Then why shouldn't I engage in this behavior?
Thank you for that. That's interesting, of course, because it affects everything that we're doing, and we are all seeing this right now. So we in brand protection spend a lot of time talking about how to stop bad actors, how to prevent people from buying counterfeit, selling counterfeit, things like that. Is there anything from your digital persuasion research that can help, sort of set a framework for this conversation?
Absolutely. So, and it's interesting because the way that I perceive brand protection from a social science perspective and a media psychological perspective is it really has to deal a lot with understanding the risks and the perceptions of risks among these social media users. So without us understanding what are the parameters of these risks in the brains and minds of consumers, whether they're young or old, we're not able to streamline policies and interventions to interrupt the behemoth flow of risks online and on digital media associated with both access to and promotion of counterfeit products. So in the minds of brand protection specialists, there lies a paradox of understanding that in general, social media users recognize the dangers and ethical and moral limitations with buying counterfeit products, but they still do it, right? So this is the paradox. This is the cognitive dissonance, the disconnect between attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors. So these are representations of finding from our own collaborative research related, for example, to perceptions and motives for buying counterfeit medications via social media platform, where we find that people understand the dangers, but they're going to go for the cheaper option. They're going to know for what is accessible. I think it is also important to acknowledge that there is a deep generational divide in terms of risk perceptions associated with certain behaviors, both online and offline. So I'll give an example from a recent unpublished study that we conducted just a few months ago. So in that study, we surveyed college students here at MSU regarding their attitudes, perceived social norms, as well as purchase and use behaviors of 3 classes or categories of products. So we tested food delivery services, online dating sites, and cannabis products. And our primary intent was to select these 3 categories as a sample of categories that vary in terms of perceived stigma to these products. And we thought that cannabis is cannabis is now legal in Michigan, but it still has a historical, social attributes that would make it a highly stigmatized product. And we thought that moderate stigmatization would be regard to online dating sites, and the food delivery services would be the lowest in terms of product stigma. To our shocking surprise, our sample of college students rated their perceived stigma nearly equally, if not higher, for online dating sites compared to cannabis. So this expresses a generational uniqueness for the younger crowds on social media. What we as millennials and Gen Xers perceive to be risky might not have the same level of perceived risk in the minds of young consumers. We also see certain distinctions when researching older adults, for example, people who have not grown up with technology and who are struggling to make sense of that world. So research we've done earlier in relation to risk perceptions and safety protections when conducting online banking, we showed that older adults struggle with making sense of the digital world from a protectionist view. And that's why they often fall victims and prey to online predators. Link that to the exponential, if not explosive, growth in online pharmacies and the percentage of those that market and sell substandard and falsified medications online. So it might be worthwhile to think of stratifying our consumers by different strands of attributes, including their age, gender, ethnicity, and other psychographic attributes that could explain how these consumers perceive the risks. So the risks are not the same for everyone. We tend to think that everyone should understand the risks of buying counterfeit products. Everyone should know the moral and ethical dilemmas of buying counterfeit products, but the reality is that there's a great variability in what I consider risky as opposed to what my students consider risky. So one of my favorite examples is I teach consumer behavior, and every semester students conduct consumer research projects. And the past semester, we were just coming out, going back to the classroom, and they were conducting research on how did the pandemic change consumer behavior in relation to a particular product. And one of the groups was studying electronic cigarettes. And one of the findings that they found is that during the heat of the pandemic, college students not only were consuming electronic cigarettes together, but they were sharing them, sharing the same device altogether. And for someone at my age, I almost fell to the ground of like, do you understand what is going on? So we really have to understand, and the pandemic has really showed us that our risk perceptions are very different based on our age, on our ethnicity, and unfortunately, based on our political lineage.
Do you think industry and products is a variable in there as well too? As for example, online pharmaceuticals as opposed to clothing or makeup or something else.
Absolutely, I think there is, there's a certain importance for the product category in that, the risks associated with buying medicine might be more intense than the risks of buying a Gucci bag, because with Gucci bag, I might be sticking it up to the capitalist system, and whereas with medication, it has a direct impact on my health. But we have to start thinking as a community of how can we start changing attitudes and behaviors, maybe in the low-hanging fruit, in things that impact people's life in a more direct way, to try and build their muscle memory of like, if I start training people and convincing them to question the decisions when they're buying medications online, the hope is that same mental algorithm in their heads is going to come up when they are thinking about buying fake shoes or fake handbags or or fake batteries, right?
So let's say you are able to target age, gender, ethnicity, political beliefs, whatever those categories are, and you have a chance as someone who's a brand protection professional to put some type of messaging out in social media. Is it a negative message? Is it a positive message? What are the most effective types? Or, a holistic approach to putting out a messaging platform once you have that data to be able to make an informed consumer campaign?
So I think there is no single answer to this question. It has to be research and evidence based, right? So, for example, in one of the studies that we have conducted recently, related to the effectiveness of fear and humor appeals in relation to buying counterfeit medications on social media, we found that for individuals who have bought medications online before, the story is very different. So the effect is reversed. We tend to think that humor might be more suitable in that regard rather than fear. But for someone who hasn't experienced online medications, it might be an easier sell for fear. And I think it is important to highlight here that, again, with regard to the information overload, the messaging that I often encounter is extremely information dense and has a lot of information, but also a lot of cryptic and jargony language that expects a certain level of literacy, but also a certain level of buy-in and interest. While this information is extremely valuable for those who are interested, we have to also think about our objectives. What is our objective here? We cannot achieve attitude and behavior change without getting eyeballs on the message, without raising awareness, without getting the attention. And getting people's attention can require different strategies than getting them to change their behavior. So oftentimes we tend to think of these interventions as in a cross-sectional way. It's a one-shot. I'm going to put all my energy into this message, and it's going to solve all the problems in the world. And behavior change is a long process. It's a planned process. So understanding the dynamics of behavior change is extremely important here.
Can you give us an example of how you might have seen that behavior change in some of your other studies? I'm thinking maybe the alcohol one or some of the other ones you've done.
Well, so I mean, let me think. That's a good question. So, for example, what we know now about what gets viral on social media are things that are of high intensity of emotions and high pleasantness. So this is why cat videos are still popular. This is why thirst videos are popular on TikTok, because that image of sexualized bodies grabs people's attention. So it really drives from our basic instincts of responding to these basic needs, basic physiological and physical needs of love, belongingness. That's why, we had the crisis of the baked feta during the heat of the pandemic, because everyone was so invested in food, and food is very appealing. We are predetermined to pay attention to messages that activate what is called our motivational nervous system. This is our approach motivation. So things that are related to food, love, sex, cute babies, animals, all of these ignite positive feelings, and they can grab people's attention. But also things that it can ignite fight or flight behaviors, such as elevating fear. So during times of crisis, ringing the alarm bells might get people's attention to try and activate that fight or flight behavior. So that can get people's attention. So the other thing that I wanted to mention earlier, in deviating from thinking about consumers and interventions for consumer education in a cross-sectional manner, is how do we as a brand protection community start thinking about this from a customer relationship management perspective, rather than a top-down marketing strategy or a push marketing strategy. So push marketing strategies is, I am the advertiser, I'm going to tell you about this cool thing, and you're going to follow through with that behavior. And people are too busy for that. They have tons of other things to do online and offline, that might not be the best strategy. So how can we start thinking about cultivating communities of support and advocacy around this issue and actually building relationship with consumers? So great examples of things within that realm, and probably some people will remember it, is the railway safety video from Australia that got extremely viral because it played on that element of infusing humor but highlighting an important issue and just getting people interested. So get people interested, get them to pay attention, and then devise a multi-step strategy that to walk them through that what we call in marketing and advertising as the purchase funnel or the behavior funnel. So we can't have behavior unless we've ignited interest, awareness, and attitude change. And it is a change reaction, but on social media, these things can happen in a cyclical and iterative ways. So we can't just say, today I'm focusing on this. We have to devise a multi-step strategy that is integrated within a larger, broader perspective.
So it's actually possible to take that traditional marketing funnel, but use it for anti-counterfeiting efforts as well.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. So when you started at the beginning, you talked a little bit about indirect and direct digital persuasion. Can you talk a little bit more about that in the context of online brand protection?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, in the study that we've conducted on counterfeit medications, we found out that, anecdotally speaking, this is not research based, but a lot of the promotion of counterfeit medications was happening through commenting, and these sellers posting a comment on a thread. When someone is talking about Adderall, they'll post a comment and they'll say, message me on Kick and I'll have some. So this is an example of a direct persuasion intent. Indirect persuasion intent is my friend John Smith posts that, hey, I got Adderall for this price from this seller, or I'm using these Adderall that I bought online. So social media has a large component that relates to what is called electronic word of mouth. It's when users generate content that is supportive of a particular product or strategy. So another example would be, and this is very, very popular on TikTok, for example, these unboxing videos of luxury fake brands. So this can be an example of indirect persuasion. There is no direct marketing. There's no direct link to buy the product, but rather what it does is it creates this other chain of social normative behavior of like, oh, this looks really good. Might I give it a try? So I'll go to Alibaba or Amazon or eBay and try to look for the product, or I'll start searching for similar products.
Is one more effective than the other, or they're just different ways that it reaches the consumer?
I think it's different. I mean, when we're looking at, direct impact on purchase, for example, a message with a strong call to action will likely receive better chances of adherence to that behavior. But also we're seeing this murkiness with influencer marketing and the role of influencers who dabble between electronic word of mouth and traditional direct persuasion. So I think it's very murky. It's very, we can't divide it up. It comes as a collective and it lives within this larger organism that has a mind and a structure and affordances of their own.
So just a reminder to everyone on right now, feel free to ask your questions. We've had quite a few come in. And Salim, that will lead me to my next question. Can you describe this phenomenon of influencers? We're all aware of it, but why is it so effective, especially around counterfeits and dupes and all these other types of goods?
Well, it's effective primarily because it is people like me. There is a certain effect of similarity with the influencer or social comparison. This is someone I aspire to be, aspire to become. And it makes the message a little less in your face and more so that this person is providing you a service by talking about this product or brand. Now, the other interesting thing is when I ask my undergraduate students of like, how does it make you feel if your friend was posting about a brand and then you later found out that they were getting paid to promote that particular message? And their response, well, I expect everyone is getting paid by brands to promote any product, right? So the area of influencer marketing is extremely influential, especially with some of the research coming out of some of the industry centers that is showing that it is in fact greater engagement with content by micro influencers, not macro influencers. They get a ton more engagement, and this is the area where I think there's a lot of penetration as it deals with counterfeit. You will not likely find Kim Kardashian promoting a fake brand, but you'll likely find someone with 10,000 followers promoting a fake brand on their social media. And this is where I think there's real danger in terms of how do you manage this relationship in the absence of clear guidelines and regulations and policies to guide this. And this is the tricky part is we only create policies after problems happen and try to walk our way backwards to these things instead of listening to the science and the ringing alarm bells in academia that have pointed to these issues early on. So there have been a number of incidents of influencers who were, were sought after by brands for promoting fake products and counterfeit products, but without, because the influencers might, the worst that could happen is they might be excluded from the platform, but they will create a different identity. They will gravitate to a different platform and continue to do what they do. Without clear guidelines and follow-up and regulation, it might be difficult to contain the potential explosive impact of counterfeiting within this particular field.
Can you describe a little bit about why you think it's more dangerous at this level with the smaller influencers, and maybe even how do they get into this? Are they recruited? They think they just want to, be the next Kylie Jenner? What's the motivation behind it besides profit?
I think the generation, we're living in a generation that is primarily motivated by fame, by attention. It is a number of years ago, there was a PBS special on Frontline called Generation Like, and the impact that this euphoric popularity brings to our systems is extremely intriguing, but also dangerous. There are changes in the brain structure, especially among social media users, of that constant need to fill in the dopamine levels by the engagement, the constant liking. So we're doing some research now and trying to understand, what goes in the minds of influencers and how do they alter their strategy to try and navigate between the algorithm as well as people's love and affection, and looking at exactly, unfortunately, this is not within the context of counterfeiting, but within generally looking at influencers. And there's a lot of research about the influencer effect, but not a lot on influencers themselves. And this is a part that I'm working on with one of my doctoral students. And just thinking about, we all have a mental model of how the algorithm works and what we expect people to like. And influencers are heavily driven by this intent to please, intent to get more likes, more views, get on the For You page, get something that is viral. And in the case that things, as they relate to, for example, brand protection and counterfeit, if someone finds that a community is receptive to their ideas, to their posts, then that could present them with an opportunity to keep doing what they're doing to try and get more. Another challenge with influencers is that not everyone who says sponsored or this brand is paying me is actually getting paid. A lot of these micro influencers and smaller influencers are trying to get on the bandwagon by saying, I'm promoting this brand to try and make it through the algorithm and get the deals later on. So everyone wants rich, to be rich, famous, in a very fast way. But the danger with that is it produces an unregulated, unfiltered way of things that might be feeding our dopamine levels on a constant basis just for the sake of our entertainment, without understanding the impact it has on society and our health and well-being.
Scary. I know a lot of this from you before, but when we hear about it, it's always scary, especially even the social media use in my own house here. Um, Maybe we can take a second for you to explain a little bit about your map lab, because it's very interesting. Like whenever I think about studying social media, I always assume people are just scrolling through things and looking at snapshots of things, but maybe you can explain a little bit about that because I think it's really interesting to know what the scientific study is behind this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in our lab, despite the fact that we have dabbled with behavioral data and server-based data, but we tried to look, for the lack of a better term, under the hood of what happens in people's brains when they are exposed to certain messages. So we leverage psychophysiological measures and eye tracking to locate and identify what are the underlying processes that are emerging when people are actually in a social media experience or in a media exposure experience. And I say experience because there is no longer a media message. There are media experiences, because every message that you put out there lives within each person's newsfeed and has there's impact of that. So we typically bring people into the lab. We hook them to these sensors that measure their physiological responses like heart rate and skin conductance or sweat gland, the amount of sweat in their glands. And we also measure where their eyes travel on the screen to try and isolate the psychological underlying mechanisms that are associated with attention, with emotional processing, as well as other areas related to how people react and respond. But we also try to link that to their other data related to their attitudes and behavior. So does paying attention to something mean that I'm going to change my attitude? And in some of the cases, this might not be the case.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. So in these last few minutes, I think I'll ask you the question that I'm always interested in hearing from everybody I talk to these days, and that is, how do you think the pandemic has impacted all of this? We know that, of course, everyone went online for more shopping and more everything when we were, on lockdown, and now that's starting to open up again. How has it changed that, and how do you see it going forward? Are we going to sort of stay where we've been, or are we going to go back? Are we going to go to a different place? What does that look like in the social media space?
Well, and I think that it is safe to say that the pandemic has ushered a new age that emphasizes online shopping for all sorts of products. And I don't think online retail is going anywhere, and the power of habit here is extremely important. So these systems are built on the concepts of stickiness and enhancing loyalty and sucking you in and using your data to keep providing you with content that appeals to who you are and that ultimately feeds back into your consumerism. So little things from just signing, all of us click on an ad and we're prompted to fill in our data and information and email address and sometimes our credit card information. All of these, despite all the dangers, make shopping online extremely easy, right? How many of us have, like, when they missed our credit card, felt uncomfortable that we had to walk all the way to our wallet and bring our credit card and literally type in the numbers, right? So it makes it extremely more accessible. But also what is interesting, and this is where some of the danger comes through, is we're talking about all these risky behaviors in terms of, people being exposed to these messages that promote risky behaviors. And the distance between exposure to the message and actually clicking on the shopping cart and checkout is very short. It's much shorter than when you're exposed to the message in a TV ad or in a magazine ad. And guess what? You have to now put on pants and shoes and get in your car or get on the bus and go to the store and look within the store. So it has provided us with this convenience. And I think this is where that convenience can be leveraged by counterfeiters to interrupt that process and mimic that convenience and get people to buy these products more and more. So the pandemic has changed the way that we use media and how we use them. The physical and social isolation also have contributed to the growth of other things, what we're now terming as the metaverse, from virtual reality to cryptocurrency, NFTs. And there are direct and apparent dangers for counterfeiting within these spaces. So I've been reading about the new bomb field of counterfeit NFTs, for example, and counterfeit luxury brands in the metaverse. All of these are immediate threats that we will have to find way of facing. What is more, I think, is that the growth of the metaverse is going to reshape how we communicate, both in real time and asynchronously. And the question then becomes, what and how would impact takedowns? When we're dealing with these complex environments, we're dealing with a huge amount of data that is stored somewhere. And how do you pick that apart and identify what can lead you to the incident of counterfeits before it gets popular or before someone reports it? So the question that I think we can end with is how will brand protection function in those spaces amid limited budgets and resources, limited technologies and access, and brand guidelines that you have to follow. So yeah, I think there are clear, important questions that remain to be answered.
Agreed, and I know a lot of you on the call, we've all been following, some of the latest lawsuits involving counterfeits and NFTs, and we'll be talking about that in a later session on academic hot topics. So for now, I think we're going to wrap up. Salim, thank you so much for all of your insight today. And for any of you who are interested in following up with Salim or myself about any of the topics today, please feel free to email us or reach out to us at the center. Our next hot topic is going to be on April 15th at noon Eastern, featuring John Hurtig, a colleague of ours who Salim also was doing some of the pharmaceutical research with. We'll be talking about consumer behavior in online pharmacies and counterfeits and furthering this conversation. So Leah Everberg will be hosting that as well. So for those of you who attended today, thank you for your attendance. And Salim, as always, it was great hosting you today.
Thank you, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, everyone at A-CAPP.